This is super exciting. I know we have lots of people participating and watching this cooking class today. So let's see here. Um, okay, we started recording. Perfect. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do the cooking part first. And then after the cooking portion, we're going to review a little bit of that PDF that was sent over to you via email. It's also attached in the chat. If you can't locate the email or if you don't have it readily available, you can just go ahead and find it in the chat there. The recipe is also located in that PDF document. So we're not going to be sharing the screen with the recipe on it, just so that way you can actually see everything that I'm doing. If we were to share the screen, you would only see the screen and not me. So if you want to reference the recipe while I'm cooking along, you can go ahead into the chat and find that document. It is on page 15. So if you wanted to scroll down and find that, you can find it easily. So the first recipe well, we're doing one recipe today, but the first part of the recipe we're going to do is we're going to start to cook the vegetables. We're going to roast them in the oven today. So this recipe is really great because you can use pretty much any vegetable that you have in your refrigerator. Since it's fall too, we're starting to heat up our oven and pull out those nice root vegetables and just serve nice warm dinners. This is a great dinner to make in advance. You can batch cook. Actually, the vegetables, you can batch cook this whole sheet pan and then rotate out different proteins. There's lots of different ideas that you can do with this. So please don't think that you have to follow the recipe exactly the way that it's given to you. It's super flexible and you really can use pretty much any vegetable and you can use rice with it, lots of different things. So without further ado, I'll get started cooking. And just to show you how simple this recipe is with flexibility, I'm actually adding in cauliflower as well. You know what? I wonder if you can see it better if I turn that off. Yes, that is less shiny. Perfect. All right. So what I'm going to do, as you can see, I've already pre-cut and rinsed all of my vegetables. I did this just so that way you didn't watch me have to cut 2 sweet potatoes and 3 cups of Brussels sprouts. It just made it way more streamlined. However, when you are prepping your vegetables, just make sure that you're rinsing them and washing really, really well, especially if you're using root vegetables. I actually like to use a vegetable brush, and it's just like a soft bristle brush, and you can brush the potato to get all of the dirt and grime that might be stuck to the outer skin. So then I just cut it into little bite-sized pieces. I have cauliflower in here as well, like I had mentioned, and I just broke off some of the thicker stems just so it's a little easier to eat. The Brussels sprouts, again, you want to rinse them and make sure that they are nice and clean, and then you're just going to cut off the little end where it was attached to the stem. I'm also adding red onion to this recipe, and I just thinly sliced it. Well, actually, this isn't even really that thin, but I just sliced it. You don't have to make it too thin. You can also quarter it if you want bigger chunks of it. Roasting it makes it, yes, I did leave the skin. Thank you, Maria. I did leave the skin on the sweet potatoes. So whenever I cook root vegetables, I actually don't peel them. A lot of times you see in recipes to peel veggies and all of that, but there's actually a lot of nutrients that are packed in that skin, especially fiber. So I always like to leave them on. If you or your child is a visual eater, or maybe you don't like the texture of the skin, you can also remove it as well. But I personally like it with skin on. Same thing if you're using regular potatoes. I just prefer to leave the skin on. So the red onion tends to have a pretty strong flavor, but when you roast it, it actually makes it kind of sweet and much more mild. So if you ever had a red onion, like raw red onion in a salad or something like that, and you're like, wow, I don't like that, don't worry, this is very different. I encourage you to give it a try roasted, but if that's still not your thing, you can omit it. Like I said, it's very flexible. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine all of these ingredients on a baking tray. It's a little bit of a deeper tray than your typical cookie pan. This is specifically meant for roasting, so it does have a deeper crevice here, so that way it can collect any juices. Also, it's just nice so that way it can hold more of the food. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it right on there. on the recipe itself, I said that you can mix it in a big bowl. You can absolutely do that as well, but just to simplify it and use less dishes, if you have all of your ingredients cut, you can actually just combine it right on the baking dish. That's totally fine. So then I have my Brussels sprouts as well. If you don't like Brussels sprouts, you don't need to add them. You can also use shredded Brussels sprouts instead of halved Brussels sprouts. Just know that if you use shredded Brussels sprouts, they're going to cook a lot faster than the halved Brussels sprouts. So if you're doing shredded, I would actually recommend that you don't add them with the rest of the ingredients and you maybe just put them in for the last 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes of the cooking process. Otherwise, unfortunately, you will burn those precious little Brussels sprouts. You don't want to do that. Then we've got our cauliflower. Like I said, adding it in just to show you some flexibility with this recipe. You can add in broccoli as well, totally fine. I'm using all fresh vegetables for this as opposed to using frozen, just because if you were to use frozen vegetables, the moisture content is so much higher in them. It does yield a little bit of a different texture once it's all cooked and ready to go. So for that reason, I do like to keep it as fresh as possible. And luckily, pretty much root vegetables are starting to get in season, and you can really use a variety of different things for this. So I'm just going to break apart my red onion. You want to spread the ingredients out so that way the flavor of the onion gets on the rest of the veggies. You can see I am piling it pretty high. I'm not worried about completely spacing them out. If you space it out more, they will get a little bit crispier. It really just depends on your own personal preference. So I've got all that. Now, every vegetable is a different size, of course. As you know, I'm sure everyone here has at least made one vegetable in their lifetime. So it's all going to be a little bit different. That red onion I cut, is massive. So I don't need to add all of that. You can kind of use your judgment too. If you love a certain vegetable and you want more of it, totally fine. Go ahead and add more. But you can see we've got lots of veggies here. So I want to add just enough red onion just to spread it all out. Okay, so now once I have this done, I'm going to add in a 1/4 cup of olive oil. Now, I'm not endorsing this brand by any means, but this is my favorite olive oil. I like this olive oil because it's actually 100% olive oil. If you've ever heard of brands sometimes not using authentic olive oil, they could actually use a different variety of oil. Sometimes brands will do a mix of like canola oil, vegetable oil, stuff like that, and just smack olive oil on the bottle if they use a little bit of it, which is so wrong. But this brand is actually authentic, so you don't have to worry about that. Plus, it's super easy to use. It's like a squeeze bottle. So again, not endorsing it, but just a helpful little kitchen tip. All right, so once we have our olive oil on there, like I said, about a 1/4 cup. If you have more veggies, you're welcome to use more. I just wouldn't, drown it in the oil. Otherwise, you're going to be frying your veggies, and that that would be a little bit greasy at that point. All right, so next things I'm going to do, I'm going to add a teaspoon of sea salt. I'm really just sprinkling it over top. Does not have to be sea salt. You can use pretty much any salt. But I think sea salt and kosher salt, those two salts are really nice to cook with just because they have a nice stable flavor. They're not overtly salty. Then I've got some dried oregano. Again, 1 teaspoon. However, you can really adapt that however you want, or you can omit it if you don't like oregano. And then garlic powder, I'm only going to add a 1/2 of a teaspoon of this. 1 teaspoon is a little bit overbearing with the garlic powder. So, well, at least that's my personal preference, but you can feel free to add more if you're a garlic powder lover. All right, at this point in time, I actually have all of my ingredients in the tray. So you don't have to mix this very well because as this roasts, all the flavors will blend together. It'll just be really, really good. And it's not really going to stick to the pan either. Roasted vegetables in general, they might stick a little bit, But at the end, if you have a spatula and you scrape it along the bottom, it actually will just peel really nicely up from the base of the pan. So you can see I've got a lot of veggies here. This volume will actually decrease in size substantially. Can one use fresh garlic? And I missed the rest of that question, but yes, you can absolutely use fresh garlic. You can use garlic cloves. That is absolutely fine. You can leave them whole, actually, like whole garlic cloves. I don't mean the whole head of garlic. Well, actually, you could technically, but I would probably break up the head of garlic and put the cloves all throughout it. Or you can chop the garlic as well. Just know that garlic, once it's chopped, if you're not putting the whole clove in there, it will cook faster than everything else. So if you've ever followed a recipe that has both onion and garlic, you always add the garlic after you've already added the onions for a little bit of time because garlic cooks much faster. So just keep that in mind if you wanted to use chopped garlic. But if you were to use garlic cloves, or even like you put like a whole head of garlic in the corner just for the fragrance and to make that nice garlic paste at the end, because it gets sort of like pasty once it's done baking, that'll take much longer. So you won't have to worry about that. Now, I'm going to leave it uncovered. You can cover it up though. That's personal preference. It really is going to cook just fine. The only difference is that it'll just be a little bit more moist if you were to cover it versus leaving it uncovered. I personally like them to be nice and browned. So you'll see them once I pull them out of the oven. They'll be nice and brown, but if you were to cover it with foil or something along those lines, it will get a little less browned and it'll just roast a little bit more evenly from the steam and the evaporation of any existing water on the veggies. So I have my oven preheated to 400 degrees. I like this temperature because that's what makes it nice and browned. However, if let's say, I mean, I know we're going into the cooler months, but let's say you're making this recipe on one of the hotter days around now, you can turn it a little bit lower. Just know that if you turn it lower, it's going to take more time. So just consider that as well. So I'm going to pop that in the oven. All right. So once that goes in the oven, like I said, I have it set to 400 degrees. That's going to take about like 30 minutes in the oven. That's at a regular standard oven wind speed. And what I mean by wind speed is if you have a convection oven or my oven's fancy. We bought this house and it had it in it already, but it actually has a built-in air fryer. It's really cool. So if you wanted to use the air fryer, if you have one of those, you can put it on the air fryer setting. That's fine too. All that means is that the wind in the oven is super high speed. That's all that means. So you can absolutely use that or convection or regular bake. Just remember that if you're doing convection or air fry mode, it is going to cook faster. So don't depend on the 30 to 35 minute. I would say maybe check on it at like 20, 25 minutes just to make sure it's okay. Every oven is different, so it might take longer, but I wouldn't want you to burn your veggies just because you're using a different setting. All right, so that's going to go ahead and roast. While that's roasting, we can actually start with the quinoa. So quinoa is a really great grain. It's packed with nutrients. I'm going to show you. I'm using tri-colored quinoa today. There are lots of different colors that you can get. I'm sure if you go into the grocery store, if you've ever made quinoa before, there's white quinoa, red quinoa. You can really use whatever you want. Like I said earlier, you can also use different grains. So if you wanted to use, well, you can use rice, that's for sure. You can do rice. You can also do, let's see, let me look in the, because I know I wrote out some. I want to make sure I'm reading the tips to you. Oh, maybe I didn't write it in here. I definitely thought I did. Anyway, you can use other grains as well. So really whatever you have in your kitchen, totally fine. But then if you didn't, now, of course, I'm going to encourage you to make things homemade. But if you didn't want to make the quinoa and do this whole process, there is steamables for quinoa as well. I bought this just to show you. So this is better than just not eating anything like this at all, just because it does have the nutrients in it and it is still good for you, despite it being in a steamable, microwavable bag. You essentially just clip the top and then you microwave it for just 1 minute. Oh, 1.5 minutes, and then you let it rest a minute. So it's much quicker. If you're in a time crunch or something like that and you can't wait for the quinoa to cook, you can also use something like this. That's totally fine. All right, so let's get started with the quinoa. So what I'm gonna do, I have my pan here, and so like I said, it's tri-colored quinoa. So this is what it looks like when it's out of the bag. So you can see it's multiple different colors. I'm just gonna go ahead and spread it throughout the pan. This is just the dry quinoa. So this is not from that steamable bag. It's not pre-cooked. It is important. Well, I shouldn't say it's important, but it's optional. If you see in the recipe how I have that you should rinse the quinoa first, that's because quinoa naturally has a substance called saponin on the exterior of it. And what that does is it protects quinoa from pests and different fungi. So you have to have a fine mesh strainer to rinse it. If you have like here, I'll show you. You have a normal strainer with the bigger holes, it will go right through it. Like this is what you typically would use for pasta. That'll be too big of holes, and the quinoa is so tiny it'll just go right through there. So you want it to be fine mesh, and then you're just going to give it a good rinse. It doesn't have to be with a product or anything like that, or for an extended period of time, just enough to give it a good rinse. And it actually also helps with this too. It just makes it a little bit more fluffy. But overall, the reason why I say it's not mandatory is because you can eat saponin. It's not like it's a toxic substance. It just actually gives the quinoa a little bit of a nutty flavor. So some people are more sensitive to it than others. It really just depends. All right. Next on the list, we're going to go ahead and add in some vegetable. You can either use vegetable stock or vegetable broth. So we're going to add 2 cups of this. This is going to be our cooking liquid. So you don't need to use this. You can use water if you want to, that's fine. But whenever I'm cooking any type of grain or pasta, anything like that, I actually like to use stock or broth as opposed to just water because it gives it a lot more flavor, and then I'm able to get some of those nutrients out of the stock or broth. So that's essentially why I like to do that. I'm just gonna scrape the sides because some of the little dry quinoa came up as it splashed. All right, so what I'm gonna do is move this over to the stove, and I'm going to put it on like a medium high heat. I want to bring it up to a boil. So I want to bring it up to a boil, and then once I bring it up to a boil, then I'm going to lower the heat so that way it can simmer. Once I lower it to a simmer, I'm actually going to pull out my lid because I'm going to want to cover it with a lid. What that lid is going to do is trap all that steam in there, okay? I might put it up like half on, half off. If you're fine to put the lid on in advance, it'll just speed up the cooking. So I'm just going to put it half on, half off, let it breathe a little bit, but not completely trap it in there. So it really is going to take a total of about 20 minutes to cook the quinoa. So it's really not an insane amount of time that I'm talking about here when I mentioned the steamable version. But I just like to give that option just so this way you know that you can have a healthier alternative to pasta or something like that without having to wait too much time. Now, just a side note actually that I thought of about the vegetables. While it might seem like it's way more convenient to buy cut vegetables, don't get me wrong. Cut vegetables are better than no vegetables at all. Like pre-cut, I mean, grocery stores, if you've been in your produce aisle, you can get pre-cut sweet potato and pre-cut onion. Well, maybe you can't get pre-cut onion actually now that I'm thinking about that, but you can definitely get a ton of different veggies pre-cut. It actually has other ingredients added to it to prevent it from going bad. So it has preservatives added to it, even though it's fresh. So just something to keep in mind. It really doesn't take long to just cut a sweet potato really quick, and you're avoiding all of those extra additives. A lot of times it'll be something to prevent discoloration because fresh vegetables, when you cut them, if you've ever cut a potato and you let it sit out for a little bit, well, they're going to start to change colors. Or like an avocado, how it'll turn brown, apples will turn brown. So getting something pre-cut, it's not by nature that they're not turning colors. It's because they're adding things to it. So just one way, one little trick to avoid extra processing, even though you might think that you're choosing the best option. Again, it's definitely better to do that than to just stick with like the middle of the grocery store where everything is prepackaged and dried and all of that. All right. Yeah, no, that's the right one. I scared myself for a second. I thought I turned the wrong burner on. Anyway, so what we're gonna do now, because the vegetables are roasting, the quinoa is cooking. At this time, what we're gonna do is just start to go through that document that we had emailed to you and sent to the chat, because there's some really helpful information in there regarding just like general overall nutrition and why this is so important. And not only that, but also food safety, which is really critical, just in general, just for staying safe and healthy and making sure that we are preparing foods the correct way. So I think we'll start with nutrition, which will be led by Liz. And Liz, you can go ahead and take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay, hello everyone. Eating well with a variety of foods will really help us feel our best and help our bodies function at their best. And as Paige is showing us, we really can do this in a delicious way as well. And I love that the vegetables will be roasted just because not everybody likes vegetables the first time around, but when they're roasted, it really brings out, caramelizes the natural sugars that are in vegetables and makes them taste really savory and good. So the goal is for children to grow just as they were meant to grow. And of course, we talk about this at your visits. Robin, can we go to the page with the type? There we go. Okay. So for good nutrition, we want to set the stage at mealtime so that it can be an enjoyable time for everyone. And hopefully we can show you some things to make mealtime prep less stressful, because we all know how busy that you are. We want to serve or recommend serving a variety of foods from each of the food groups, and try to eat together. It's just makes mealtime more enjoyable. Meal size can make a difference. Younger children have smaller stomachs, so you may find that it works best if you serve 3 meals and then a couple scheduled snacks in between. We want to discourage grazing. It's just, we tend to get a better variety of nutrients if we just eat at set times during the day. And of course, don't forget fluids and salt, especially for children with cystic fibrosis. Children lose more salt with CF, and they need extra salt in their diets every day, and especially when it's hot and humid or during exercise. You can serve salty snacks such as salted nuts and pretzels, salted sunflower seeds, and add salt to food and drinks. Fluids are also very important, and water and sports drinks with less sugar are great for hydration. And we just recommend that you avoid soda and too much juice. For convenience, it's always great to plan ahead and have some healthy go-to things on hand. And of course, we want to encourage exercise to move our bodies, help our muscles be strong, and help also have strong bones. And it also helps you regulate your digestive system and your appetite. Many children with CF need extra calories, and there are lots of healthy ways to do this. Adding healthy fats is one of the most efficient ways, and this can be done by adding nuts and seed butters, olives, avocados, and healthy oils. Snacks such as trail mix, shakes, smoothies, and nutrition bars will help in between meals. And then if for some reason your child's not feeling well and they don't have a great appetite, you can also put things into soups, smoothies, and shakes. You also can help make things more appealing by freezing nutrition supplements into popsicles or blending them into smoothies. And then just remember, if your child does require enzymes to help with absorption, just taking the right dose of enzymes for the snack or meal. And we can always help you with that if you want to check in. And just the next page, if we can look at that, Robin, just talks about some of the nutrients, just protein. And what's special about protein is that it's really important and essential for the body to grow, repair, and rebuild tissue and replenish the immune system. And eating enough protein can help your child heal faster and prevent infections. And good sources include eggs, dairy foods like milk and yogurt, lean meat, fish, beans, and nut butters. Carbohydrate foods are fuel for the body, and they help maintain cell and organ function. Good sources of carbohydrates are whole grains, whole wheat, breads, crackers and pasta, brown rice, quinoa, and they're also good sources of fiber, which can help prevent constipation. And then fat is a much maligned nutrient, but actually it's really important. It's the backbone for so many neurotransmitters that help our mood, and it really helps our body store energy and transport certain vitamins. So fat has more calories, and so we need to use it as whatever your child's needs are. Some children, we will encourage adding more fat because we really want to boost how much nutrition they're getting. So good sources of healthy fats are olive oil, salmon, fatty fish, nuts and nut butters, and fruits like avocados and olives. And now I think I'm going to hand it back to Paige, and she's going to talk to us about food safety.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Liz. That was a really great overview. So I just wanted to touch on food safety. I know that some of this might be, common sense to a lot of people on here, and I apologize if you know all of this already and I'm just repeating, but I do feel like it's very important to teach because if we're not cleaning properly, if we're not separating the certain foods properly that could cause cross-contamination, that could definitely result in something in making you pretty ill. So I always like to touch on this, making sure that you are washing your hands really well before touching food. You don't always have to use utensils, especially if you're in your home kitchen, you can use your hands, pick things up. I'm sure you saw me do that at some point in this kitchen, but just know that I did wash my hands very well beforehand. And then, of course, washing your hands after you're touching something that could potentially cause cross-contamination. One thing that a lot of people don't think of is tongs. This is like the number one this is the number one tool that causes cross-contamination in restaurants and home kitchens. A lot of people will think, well, if I'm cooking chicken, I can put the chicken breast in my pan with the tongs, flip them with the tongs, and then remove them with the same tongs. Not at all. When you have the heat touching the tongs, that's not enough to kill all the bacteria on it. So you should switch them out right out. So when you're using the tongs to put it in there, you can use the same ones to flip it, but then you want to grab a new pair of tongs to remove them from the pan. Something that often gets missed, especially if you're grilling or something like that. You just want to remember that that's definitely something that can cause cross-contamination. Also, cutting boards. If you have a designated cutting board for cutting raw chicken or something like that, that's super helpful because then you're eliminating that risk, especially if you have wooden cutting boards or something like that that can actually absorb bacteria. You want to make sure that you are cleaning things appropriately and separating things appropriately as well. Cooking to the appropriate temperature is very important. This is mostly for like pork, beef, poultry, seafood, basically meats. Chicken is definitely a heavy hitter. You want to make sure that you're cooking it to 165, and I won't go through all the temperatures on that list, but one really helpful kitchen tool that I have is an electric thermometer. And you basically just pierce it into the meat and just make sure that you're sanitizing it after you use it, especially if it came, well, actually, not even especially, but in general, you should always clean it. But it tells you the exact temperature. So you can put it in the thickest part of the meat, and that'll tell you if it's done or not. This way that you don't have to take, a wild guess. Oh, I think it's done. You can make sure that it is 100% okay. When you are when you're done cooking and when it's nice and slightly cooled, you don't want to put it in your fridge scalding hot, because even though that'll make it cool faster, you are now warming up your fridge. So you're actually causing more damage putting hot food in your fridge than you would think. So let it cool for a little bit, pop it in your refrigerator so that way it can chill down to 40 degrees. You want to make sure that you are doing that in the appropriate amount of time just to avoid any potential bacteria growth. So that's it for that page. And then on the next page, there's just a helpful visual on how to organize your fridge. We don't have to go through all the nitty gritty of this, but I just find it to be such a helpful tool because when you're organizing your refrigerator after you go grocery shopping, not many people know that you should actually have a certain order. There's spaces in the fridge for certain things. So it's just a little helpful tip where to put raw meats, for example. Like, you don't want to put raw chicken above your lettuce in the refrigerator, because if any drippings come down, well, you're not cooking that lettuce. You're now eating that, and that could definitely cause illness. And then, yeah, where to put your vegetables. And I think the next page talks a little bit about that as well. Maybe it's the next one after that. We'll talk about this first. Yeah, perfect. Sorry, Robin, making you bounce all over. Yeah, so this is just a little bit more on the produce section. So sometimes you actually shouldn't put certain fruits and veggies next to each other because they can make them go bad faster. So one tip, and I don't even think, yes, actually it is on here. Number 3, bananas. I buy bananas all the time. And whenever I buy a new set of bananas, if I have older bananas that are starting to, have the brown spots on them and they're starting to go bad a little bit, I always actually keep them on separate sides of the kitchen, because if you put the old bananas and the new bananas right next to each other, the new bananas will go bad faster because of the gas that's emitting from the old bananas. So again, just a couple helpful tips. And then if we can skip back to that page before, sorry, I didn't realize I put it in that order. I'm just going to quickly go through the food product datings because it can be so confusing. If you're buying something in the grocery store, those dates that are on the products, it actually does not tell you when it goes bad. So they all mean different things, but essentially all of these dates are for the grocery store. They're for the grocery store, so that way you can tell when it's peak quality, when they should sell it by, when like the goal is for restocking, all of that. So I like to show this because some people have a hard, which is fine, but some people have a hard stop when they see a date and they're like, oh, that's definitely bad. Look at it first, make sure that it actually is bad. If it's bad, of course, obviously don't eat it, but sometimes it's not. And sometimes it goes bad before this date. So that's something to consider as well. If you ever opened up milk and you're getting close to the date and you're like, oh man, that doesn't smell right, go with your gut. Don't take a chance on it. The dates are not always accurate, and they don't mean that that's a hard stop date, that it's bad. So just take it with a grain of salt and always trust your own judgment. Right. And perfect. Okay, so we went through all of that. I just want to skip down to the chef tips and adjustments, which, yes, perfect. Okay, so the recipes are actually, I keep calling them recipes. It's one recipe, just 2 different parts. They're actually almost finished, so this is perfect timing. The quinoa has absorbed all of the liquid and it's starting to get nice and fluffy. And then I checked on the veggies. They're starting to get nice and brown, which is awesome. I just want to go through some of the different adjustments while that's wrapping up. You can add so many different toppings to this. Like I said before, this can be a really easy recipe to batch cook. Like let's say you like to batch cook on Sundays, so that way for the work week you have something in your fridge. I actually personally love to do this, especially when it comes to just like the side or the base of the recipe, and then you can rotate out different things. So for example, if I made this tray of veggies, let's say I made them on Sunday and I made this whole tray, right? I mean, it depends on your family size too. You would probably have to multiply it depending on how many people are in your family, but you can switch out the topping. So if you wanted to switch out different proteins, you can add black beans to the top. You can also add healthy animal proteins. You could do like shredded chicken or steak. You could do seafood like seared or grilled salmon. You can also add on like seared tofu that's marinated. That would be delicious as well. You can, like I said before, um, add different veggies, of course, but if you wanted to add raw veggies on top, like you could do avocado, you could slice up some fresh avocado and add that, sort of make like your own little veggie bowl, if you will. There is an avocado dressing on the next page, which we can go back to after we're done with this page. But it's essentially, it's from a cookbook. So the cookbook is credited on it. If you wanted to check out more recipes from there, it's awesome. But this is a great dressing to drizzle over top of this recipe. It's nice and vibrant. We're not making it today. This is just a little tip if you wanted to add that on. It's delicious. And it's just like a pop of freshness if you wanted to add that. And then back to the last page, like I said, you can add tons of different veggies to the tray itself. And I actually did add in the grain substitutions. I couldn't find it earlier when I was I was also drawing a complete blank. I couldn't think of any other grain. But yeah, you can use tons of other grains, farro, rice, or millet being just three of them. You can also do pasta too if you wanted. If you like pasta better than any of those, you can do that. Just know that it's not the same nutritionally. But you can definitely do that. And then, like I said, with the convection oven, and I put the amount that the recipe listed yields. However, remember how I didn't add all of the red onion because the red onion I got just happened to be massive, which I didn't even realize that. You can yield, it'll yield different measurements based on the size of your veggies. So just keep that in mind. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to turn off my pan that has the quinoa in it. I'm going to take the lid off, nice and steamy. Okay, put that there and show you this. So as you can see, it's nice and fluffy. So quinoa, when it's cooked, it has little rings that pop off of it. It might be really tricky to see in the camera because, I mean, that would be some pretty detailed camera work if you were able to see the little rings that are popping off of the quinoa. But it does, so if you're cooking it, don't be alarmed. That's just part of the quinoa shell that is cooking. And as it's softened, it does break off sometimes. So that's what that is. Quinoa in itself is pretty bland, so that's why I like to cook it in the vegetable stock or broth. Alternatively, if you wanted to use like a bone broth, you could do that as well. You can do like a beef bone broth or, you know, whatever you want to do. So that is one way to give it flavor, but then mixing it with the vegetables, that's definitely going to give it additional flavor. So I'm going to pull the veggies out now. They should be, for the most part, done. I'll probably pop them in for just a couple more minutes once class is done, but I just want to show you. You can see they definitely got nice and browned already. So like this cauliflower here, I don't know if you can even see, but they did get browned, some of them, but I do want to pop it in just for a little bit longer, just so that way I can get really crispy. That's a nice crispy Brussels sprout. Like I said, if you were to do shredded Brussels sprouts, I would say about like now would probably be a good time to do that if you wanted to add those in. Just because I'll probably only put it in for another like 5 to 10 minutes, not too long. But just make sure that if you're adding things after you've already mixed this all together, make sure that you are mixing it with some olive oil in a separate bowl. You do, especially with shredded Brussels sprouts, you want to give it a little bit of oil to hydrate it. Otherwise, it's just going to be super dry and it's not going to turn out very well. So at this point, you can see that it also decreased in size. It got a lot smaller. So veggies naturally, when you roast them, they just get smaller. So that's something to consider as well. But this is great because you can, once it's all done, you just let it cool for a little bit. Like I said, you don't want to put it in your fridge when it's piping hot. You're just going to heat up everything in your fridge and you don't want to do that. So I would just let it cool for a little bit. And then you can put it in like a big storage container. You can also meal prep with it. So if you have, we actually meal prep in my household. So we like to use these meal-sized glass containers. I personally like to use glass containers just because they don't leach any chemicals. If you're using like plastic containers, something like that, a lot of people do. So it's okay. You don't have to go out and buy glass containers just because I'm saying this. But since we like to meal prep days in advance, I just feel better if it's sitting in something non-porous like glass. Silicone is another great material for that. But if you wanted to do a large bowl, you can put it in something larger so that way you can just grab from it. But we like to personally do meal prep just so this way it's easier when it's that meal time. You can just grab it out of the fridge and eat it as is. And then, like I said, you can switch out the different toppings. Aside from the avocado dressing, you could do other dressings as well, or you could put some hot sauce on it. You know, you can get creative with it. So, and you can add other dry seasonings too. I only did sea salt, oregano, and garlic powder in this recipe, but if you like spicy, go ahead and add in things like cayenne pepper, paprika. You can also give it a little bit of like a Mexican flair. If you wanted to add some cumin, you know, you can really do what you want with this recipe. So I can't stress enough. It's super flexible. Really don't feel like you have to get exactly these ingredients. It's just a great way to incorporate overall healthy, well-balanced nutrition into yours, your family's diet. And yeah, so that's the recipe. And I think at this point, Maria, are you coming back on?
I'm here.
Perfect.
I don't think anyone's put anything in the chat, but feel free to put your questions in the chat if you have questions or